In 1695, Louis XIV quietly ordered that a nun at a small convent near Fontainebleau receive a generous royal pension for life. No explanation was given, and rumours immediately followed. Some whispered that she was the king's illegitimate daughter. Others claimed something even more scandalous, that she was black, or perhaps even the queen's secret child. So, who was the mysterious Black Nun of Moret, and why did the French king protect her? In the art collection of the Bibliothèque Sainte-Geneviève, a major library near the Pantheon in central Paris, one of the most curious paintings produced in 17th century France is on display. It depicts a black woman dressed as a nun. The painting was produced by an unknown artist, most likely between 1695 and 1700. This painting is of Louise Marie Thérèse, known as the Black Nun of Moret, and it is striking for multiple reasons. In the 17th century, it was highly unusual to paint an ordinary nun at all, and even more extraordinary is that the subject was a black woman, at a time when very few people, let alone cloistered nuns, were black in France. All the more remarkable then is the fact that the painting itself remained hidden for centuries. It was only uncovered in 2014, discovered in an attic, restored, and finally put on public display. It is unclear when the Black Nun of Moret was born. Some studies suggest she came into the world around 1664, but others place her date of birth further back in time to the late 1650s. Unfortunately, the painting of her in the Bibliothèque Sainte-Geneviève does not make her situation any clearer. We don't know the exact date of the painting, so we can't judge when she was born from it. Furthermore, part of her head is covered, and it is not an especially skilled painting. Nonetheless, she appears to be in her 30s in it, or perhaps her late 20s. Virtually nothing is known about Louise Marie Thérèse's early life. Instead, she enters the historical record in the 1690s and 1700s, when several high-profile French figures of the time began writing about her. Furthermore, we know that many very prominent aristocrats visited her at the Benedictine convent of Villechasson-Moret. It was located in north-central France, near the Chateau of Fontainebleau, a residence frequently used by the court of King Louis XIV, particularly in autumn during hunting season. There she was known as La Morese, the Moresse, because of her dark skin. Moor and Moresse were terms that were regularly used in medieval and early modern Europe to describe dark-skinned men and women. The question is, why had a black woman ended up as a nun in a convent in northern France, and why were so many aristocrats either writing about her or visiting her? The answer lay with the King and Queen of France. The question of who Louise Marie Thérèse's parents were is the only real reason we know about her today. Contemporaries remarked on the unusual attention the royal family paid to her, and regularly speculated about who she might be. Curiously, depending on which theory is followed, she is said to have been either the illegitimate daughter of the King of France or his wife, the Queen. These were King Louis XIV, the longest reigning monarch of any nation in human history, and his wife, Maria Theresa of Spain. Louis had ascended the throne in 1643 when he was just 4.5 years old, and would rule down to 1715. He had an abundance of mistresses throughout his long life, and sired many illegitimate children. The case of Maria Theresa, as we will see, is more peculiar. The daughter of King Philip IV of Spain, she had married Louis in 1660 as part of a peace agreement that brought a long-running war between the French and Spanish to an end. She was well aware of her husband's many infidelities, yet it would have been far more shocking, almost unthinkable, for a reigning queen or royal consort to bear illegitimate children of their own. Against this backdrop, the story of the Black Nun of Moret becomes even more mysterious. There are three main theories concerning Louise Marie Thérèse and why the royal family and court paid so much attention to her. The first claims that she was the daughter of the king. During the 17th century, the monarchs of Europe were particularly notorious for their extramarital affairs. Charles II of England, for instance, famously didn't know how many children he had sired with his many different mistresses. Louis was no exception. He had many mistresses, some of whom he fathered illegitimate children with, and it is definitely possible that he could have had a black mistress. By the middle of the 17th century, France had become a colonial power engaged in a slave trade between West Africa and the Caribbean, and while there were few black women in France by Louis's time, there were some. It's plausible that Louis fathered a daughter with a black woman at the French court, and then sent her away to a convent to be raised. He then had courtiers visit her from time to time to check in on her in later years, and arranged a pension for her in 1695. If Louis was her father, then it may not have been an isolated development. The details are much more limited, but he appears to have possibly fathered another dark-skinned child named Dorothy. She is mentioned in a few places in the archives of the time, raising suggestions that she was a secret child of the king, but the evidence for her existence is even thinner. King Louis XIV was famously adept at secrecy, concealing whatever he deemed unfit for public knowledge, whether affairs of state or deeply personal matters, such as his discreet marriage to Madame de Maintenon in 1683, so him being the father is plausible. The second theory is one which is favoured by a lot of historians. This holds that the Black Nun of Moret was actually the daughter of the Queen. In the 17th century, it was commonplace for royal families to retain people at their courts that were considered oddities. These included dwarves and also people from Africa. One such example of this was Nabal, a black dwarf who was said to be a resident of the court. The theory holds that not long after her husband began his philandering ways, Queen Maria Theresa engaged in a liaison with Nabal. This resulted in a child who needed to be secretly sent off to a convent to avoid any royal embarrassment. Yet, there is another layer to this theory. On November 16, 1664, Queen Maria Theresa of Spain gave birth to her third child, a daughter, officially named Marie Anne. Barely 6 weeks later, the child was declared dead, her body publicly displayed before burial at Saint-Denis. Yet proponents of this theory insist the child never died. They argue that a substitute body, or even an empty coffin, was used to conceal a devastating secret. The princess was black. Alexandre Bontemps, the king's discreet first valet, is said to have quietly removed the child from court, sending her away under strict secrecy, first to the provinces, then through religious houses, before she finally disappeared into the Benedictine convent at Moret. Nevertheless, critics of this theory are unequivocal. Maria Theresa could not have been the mother. Raised in an intensely pious court, it would have been unthinkable for her to bear a child by anyone other than the king. Royal births were public events, closely watched by courtiers and foreign ambassadors, none of whom ever reported the birth of a black princess. Had such a child been born, the news would have reverberated across Europe. Instead, some historians point to a grim medical reality. Marie Anne was born after a brutal delivery, premature and gravely ill, her skin darkened and purple-like by a lack of oxygen, a detail later transformed into a rumour. The Black Nun's name, though, Louise Marie Thérèse, would certainly suggest that she was the Queen's daughter, but then again, Louise is the female counterpart of Louis, so the name could have also been chosen if she was the illegitimate daughter of the king. And the name alone doesn't automatically imply that Louise was the biological child of either the king or queen. Instead, she could have been given the names of both the king and queen if she was a sponsored orphan of the royal couple. This is more than plausible too. It was not uncommon for the crown to become the ward of infants in 17th century France. For instance, hundreds of orphaned women were sent to New France, modern-day Quebec, in the second half of the 17th century under the patronage of King Louis XIV to help populate the French colony there. Millions of North Americans today are descended from the so-called daughters of the kings. The third theory about Louise Marie Thérèse is that she was a black orphan who was simply given royal patronage. This would explain why she was provided with a pension by the king in 1695, and why court nobles were occasionally sent to Moret to check in on her. Our sources for Louise Marie Thérèse come from a number of different prominent French aristocrats and court figures during the reign of King Louis XIV. These include, for instance, the king's first cousin, the Duchess of Montpensier, who kept an extensive diary during her own tumultuous career at court. These noted that in addition to providing her with a pension, the king frequently had people sent to Moret to look in on the Black Nun. The queen was long dead by then, having died prematurely in 1683 aged just 44. These accounts go further, claiming that Louise was baptized at court before being discreetly removed to the convent, where she was notably well educated. We know this as surviving letters reveal that she could read and write with ease. Unquestionably the best account of the Black Nun was produced by Louis de Rouvois, the Duke of Saint-Simon, a prominent courtier and memoirist of the late 17th and 18th centuries. These enormous diaries are considered to be the best account of the court of King Louis XIV and Louis XV. Unfortunately, he too was unsure about Louise Marie Thérèse's parentage. Of the convent and its most famous resident, he stated, "It seems that in this convent there is a woman of colour, a Moorish woman, who had been placed there very young by Bontemps, valet of the king. She received the utmost care and attention, but never was shown to anybody. When the late queen or Madame de Maintenon went, they did not always see her, but always watched over her welfare. She was treated with more consideration than people the most distinguished, and herself made much of the care that was taken of her, and the mystery by which she was surrounded. Although she lived regularly, it was easy to see that she was not too contented with her position. Hearing Monseigneur hunt in the forest one day, she forgot herself so far as to exclaim, 'My brother is hunting!' It was pretended that she was a daughter of the king and queen, but that she had been hidden away on account of her colour, and the report was spread that the queen had had a miscarriage. Many people believe this story, but whether it was true or not has remained an enigma. Thus, even a noted court figure like Saint-Simon, who had access to scores of people who would have been aware of the king's and queen's personal affairs, was unable to say for sure what the real situation with the Black Nun of Moret was. Louise Marie Thérèse's later life is nearly as obscure as her earlier life. As noted, the queen was long dead by the end of the 17th century, but Louis XIV lived to 1715. Thereafter there was little reason for the royal court to maintain contact with the mysterious woman at the convent at Moret. We know virtually nothing about her actions from that point afterwards, though this is hardly surprising, given that nuns lived a private, cloistered life for the most part behind closed walls. What can be inferred suggests an outwardly ordinary existence, days spent in prayer, reading, and the routine labour of the convent, though the privileges she enjoyed set her apart, hinting at ties to the royal court that never fully faded. One document written by her in April 1725 attests to her continued life at the convent in her 60s. The last surviving document that she signed was dated the 10th of January 1730. It is speculated that she died in 1732, but even this cannot be concretely established. It is plausible though, as she would have been around 70 years old at the time, which is old age by the standards of the early 18th century. The issue of the Black Nun of Moret has captured the imagination in modern times, as writers and historians have speculated as to whether any of the theories concerning her parentage were correct. The French writer Pierre-Marie Dijol came up with an elaborate theory in 1978 in his book Nabal, ou Le Masque de Fer. In this, Dijol sought to tie together the legendary tale of the man in the eye mask, which Alexandre Dumas had written about in the 19th century, with the story of the Black Nun of Moret. He claimed that the man in the eye mask, an enigmatic prisoner held during Louis XIV's reign, was in fact Nabal, the Black Court Dwarf, and that he was imprisoned after the king discovered that the queen had borne the Black Nun of Moret following an affair with him. This made for a good story, but there is basically no evidence at all to substantiate it. As lacking in historical merit as Dijol's theory might have been, it did spark renewed interest in the story of Louise Marie Thérèse. Her story and that of Nabal featured in the television series Versailles, produced between 2015 and 2018. In it they followed the theory that the Black Nun was the daughter of the Queen. The discovery of the painting of her in 2014 also gave rise to a fresh bout of academic interest in her story, and numerous papers about her have appeared over the last 10 years. An exhibition entitled The Mores of Moret ran at the Musée Charles de Bruyère in Remiremont in the summer and autumn of 2019. To this day, the story of the Black Nun of Moret continues to intrigue us, but sadly, we will probably never know for sure the real truth of who her parents were. Thank you so much everyone for watching the story on the Black Nun of Moret. I hope you found it interesting. Who do you think was her real parents? Do you think it was the Queen? Do you think it was the King? Do you think she was orphaned by the royal family? Let me know your thoughts down below in the comments. I really am looking forward to reading them. If you want more mysterious tales like this, also let me know down below in the comments. And I hope you guys are subscribed and have notifications turned on to get all my videos as soon as I upload them. Anyway, that's all from me, so I'll see all of you in the next Forgotten Life. Thanks.